We thought we knew war. We thought we understood strength. We were wrong. The galaxy was old. Older than the dreams of any single world. Empires rose and fell like waves on a shore, their stories etched in ruins scattered among the stars. And yet, through all the centuries of conflict, one truth remained: victory belonged to those with the sharpest blades and the coldest hearts. We had searched for them, our perfect warriors, for years. Entire fleets combed the edge of charted space, scanning for species that could endure the wars to come. We needed soldiers who would not hesitate, who would fight without question, who would carry our banners into the blood and smoke of battle and never falter. When we found them, they were smaller than we expected. Fragile even. A single blow from most of our soldiers could break their bones. Their planet was unremarkable: blue seas, green continents, thin clouds drifting under a yellow sun. Nothing about them looked like the legends of old. And yet, there was something in their eyes. It wasn't just intelligence, it was something older, something dangerous. When they looked at us, it was as if they were weighing us, measuring us, not as allies, not as leaders, but as something else entirely. We didn't understand it at first. We offered them technology centuries ahead of their own, showed them weapons that could shatter a mountain, ships that could cross light years in days. In exchange, we asked only for their service. To fight our wars. To stand as the sword arm of our empire. They accepted. Too easily. We celebrated, believing we had found the answer to all our fears. We believed they would be loyal, obedient, grateful. The first time we saw them fight, we began to understand our mistake. It was a small skirmish on a frozen moon, a test, nothing more. We expected them to follow orders precisely, to move as they were told, to strike where commanded. But the humans, they didn't just follow orders. They adapted. They disobeyed when they saw a better path. They took risks no sane soldier would take. And they won. Not because they were the fastest. Not because they were the strongest. But because they refused to give up even when the battle should have been lost. I watched one of them, blood freezing in the air around him, crawl through the snow toward an enemy position after his weapon was gone. He didn't stop. He didn't surrender. That day I learned something terrifying. Humans do not fight because you tell them to. They fight because they choose to. We kept sending them into battle, thinking we could control it. But every victory they won seemed to change them. Or perhaps it changed us, because soon we realized they weren't just fighting for our cause anymore. They were fighting for something else. Something we couldn't see. Their unity was strange. They bickered constantly. Argued over the smallest details. Disagreed about tactics, strategies, even the point of the war itself. And yet, when the fighting started, they moved like parts of the same living thing. Not out of fear of punishment, but out of something deeper. I remember asking one of them why. Why risk themselves for another soldier when retreat would save their life? He just looked at me and said, because they do the same for me. We had never seen anything like it. Our warriors fought for rank, for glory, for the promise of reward. Humans fought for each other. And that made them dangerous in ways we couldn't predict. It wasn't long before whispers began to spread through the empire. The humans were unsettling. Too independent. Too unpredictable. And worst of all, they were winning battles we had never intended them to win. Battles we had prepared to lose for political reasons. They didn't seem to understand the concept of an acceptable defeat. To them, every fight was worth winning. Every enemy worth breaking. And then there were the stories. A human ship, cut off and surrounded, fought for 5 days without supplies. Another unit, hopelessly outnumbered, managed to turn an entire siege into a rout. There were even rumors of humans refusing to retreat after orders were given, because they believed the command was wrong. They were supposed to be our perfect warriors. Instead, they were becoming something else entirely. I began to notice the way our own soldiers looked at them. At first it was admiration. Then fear. And in the eyes of our leaders I saw something worse. Envy. The humans didn't seem to notice. Or maybe they did and simply didn't care. Their loyalty was not to us, but to each other, and to whatever silent cause burned in their hearts. We had armed them. Trained them. Taught them the ways of our wars. And now, I wasn't sure who was in control anymore. The first real sign of danger came quietly. A human commander, one we had placed in charge of only a small force, was given orders to abandon an allied world under attack. The retreat was strategic, meant to protect more valuable territory. But instead of withdrawing, the humans fortified the planet and fought back. They won. And when questioned about his refusal to follow orders, the commander simply said, "We don't leave people behind." Those words spread through the human ranks like fire. And something changed. It was no longer about our war. No longer about the Empire's ambitions. The humans were fighting for their own reasons now. We had sought the perfect warriors. And in our arrogance, we had given them everything they needed to become something far more dangerous. I wish I could tell you what happened next. I wish I could say we stopped them before it was too late. But the truth is, by the time we realized the scale of our mistake, the humans were already moving on their own, coordinating without our approval, planning battles we hadn't ordered. And when the day came that they turned their gaze on us, I don't know if anyone will be able to stop them. They are not the strongest, they are not the fastest, but they are something the galaxy has never seen before. And I think they know it. Even now, I can still remember the first time one of them looked at me after a battle. The frost clung to his uniform, his face streaked with blood and ash, and yet his eyes burned with something I could not name. In that moment I understood. We had not found our perfect warriors. We had unleashed humanity. And soon, everyone would know what that meant. When the humans first arrived, we saw them as tools, clever, adaptable tools, but tools nonetheless. We brought them into our fleets, gave them our weapons, taught them our history of wars, convinced ourselves they were ours to command. We never asked them why they agreed. At first it seemed simple. We offered them technology far beyond their own, and in return they fought our battles. But there was something in the way they studied us, the way they learned our systems. Not just memorizing them but understanding them in ways even our engineers had not. They treated our most guarded secrets like puzzles, pulling them apart piece by piece until they knew not only how they worked but how to make them better. They weren't content to just be soldiers. They became problem solvers, strategists, innovators. One of their units, stationed on a remote supply station, redesigned our outdated targeting software overnight. They didn't even ask permission. By the next morning, the station's defense systems were twice as accurate, and the crew was praising them as heroes. But to our leadership, it was a warning. Humans didn't stay in the roles they were given. They changed the roles to fit themselves. In training, they asked questions no one else dared. Not the kind that challenged authority openly, but the kind that made you realize the answer didn't exist, or worse, that it was built on something fragile. When told to follow a strategy, they'd nod, smile, and then quietly adjust it mid-battle when they saw a better way. And they were always right. It made our commanders uneasy. Orders were meant to be absolute. But with humans, orders were suggestions. I remember one meeting with a human squad leader, after a mission in the asteroid belts. He'd saved an allied ship from being destroyed, but in doing so he'd ignored his assigned target. I told him he'd risked the mission. He simply looked at me and said, "The mission is to win. Everything else is details." That was the first time I realized they didn't see war the way we did. For us, war was politics by other means. A game of territory, resources, and influence. For humans it was something older. Something personal. You could see it in their eyes when they fought. It wasn't about orders or even victory. It was about the person beside them. The people waiting for them to come home. The promise they'd made to themselves that no one would be left behind. That kind of thinking spread. Soon our own troops began to adopt human tactics. Small units started acting independently, using initiative instead of waiting for centralized orders. At first, it improved efficiency. Then it began to erode control. When soldiers start thinking for themselves in war, they stop being soldiers. They become something else entirely. And the humans? They encouraged it. Not openly but through example. They fought with a kind of reckless courage that made those around them braver. Even those who feared them couldn't help but follow them. But bravery was only one part of it. There was something darker too. The humans didn't shy away from cost. They understood it. Accepted it. On the battlefield they could make decisions that sacrificed the few to save the many, and they didn't flinch. Not because they lacked compassion but because they could carry that weight and keep moving forward. We began to hear stories from the front. Tales of impossible rescues, desperate stands, and victories pulled from certain defeat. Stories that always ended the same way, humans walking away from the ashes, quiet, tired, and already thinking about the next fight. It was then I started wondering, were they born like this or had something shaped them? I asked questions. I studied their history. What I found unsettled me more than I'd expected. Their homeworld was not peaceful. For thousands of years they had fought each other, over land, over beliefs, over survival itself. Entire civilizations had risen and fallen, each leaving scars on the planet and on their people. Their wars had been fought with steel and fire, with machines that could burn cities to the ground. And yet, no matter how devastating the conflict, they rebuilt. Always. There was a pattern to it, destruction followed by resilience. They seemed incapable of staying broken. Every time they were knocked down, they came back stronger, more determined, more dangerous. That, I think, was what we failed to see. We thought we were recruiting soldiers. What we were really bringing into our war was a species built by war itself. And they learned fast. Too fast. Within a single cycle, their commanders knew our fleet's strengths and weaknesses better than many of our own officers. They began to predict enemy movements before our analysts could. In some cases, they even fought battles without our direct supervision, and won. This should have been a triumph. Instead, it was a shadow over everything we thought we controlled. The more they succeeded, the less they needed us. I started noticing small things. Messages sent between human units without going through official channels. Supply orders that were slightly altered, always in ways that benefited their own groups. And once, a convoy that should have been on the front lines was found days later delivering aid to a colony we had already deemed expendable. They were building something. Not in the open, not in ways we could accuse them of rebellion. But piece by piece they were laying the foundation for a force that was theirs alone. Loyal not to our empire but to humanity itself. Still, there were moments, small moments, that made me doubt my own fears. I'd see them laughing together after a battle, sharing food, telling stories from their home. There was warmth there, a kind of light I had never seen in our own troops. It made me wonder if maybe we were just too rigid, too afraid of what we didn't control. But then I would remember the eyes of that soldier on the frozen moon. The fire there. The certainty. The unshakable truth that his cause was not ours. One night, after a briefing, I overheard two human officers talking quietly in their own language. I couldn't understand all of it, but one word stood out: home. The way they said it, it wasn't just a place. It was something they carried with them, something they were willing to fight and die for no matter where they were. That was when it clicked for me. We had given them weapons, ships, training, but none of it was what made them powerful. Their strength came from each other. From the bonds they formed. From that word home. And that was something we could never take from them. The realization left me cold. Because if humans ever decided that we were a threat to that home, nothing in the galaxy would save us. The tension between us grew quietly, like a storm on the horizon. Commands were obeyed more slowly. Reports were edited before they reached us. And in every meeting I could feel their commanders watching, weighing, deciding. I don't know when the breaking point will come. But I know this. When it does, it will not be with warning. Humans don't declare their rebellions in advance. They simply act. And when they do, the galaxy will change forever. I think part of me still hopes I'm wrong. That they'll remain what we wanted them to be, our warriors, our protectors, our loyal soldiers. But deep down I know the truth. We sought the perfect warriors. And in doing so, we may have armed the galaxy's most dangerous idea. It began with a whisper in the command halls. Reports that never reached the central archives. Fleet movements that didn't match the orders on record. Human units requesting training exercises in sectors we had no interest in, and somehow returning with intelligence worth entire campaigns. They weren't hiding what they were doing. Not completely. It was worse than that. They were acting as if they didn't need to. At first, we told ourselves it was efficiency. That they were simply moving faster than our bureaucracy. But I could feel it in every briefing, every after-action report. The center of gravity in this war was shifting. And it was no longer in our hands. The humans had a presence you could feel even before they spoke. When they entered a room, conversations quieted. Not out of fear of their rank, but because everyone knew they were the ones who could change the course of a battle with a single decision. I watched their commanders closely. They rarely smiled. They listened more than they spoke. And when they finally gave their thoughts, they didn't argue. They simply laid out what was going to happen as if it had already been decided. And somehow, it always unfolded exactly as they said. Our leaders began to grow restless. Meetings ran longer. Orders were rewritten mid-transmission. Plans were made in secret and only revealed at the last moment, as if keeping humans in the dark would limit their reach. It didn't work. Even when they weren't told, they seemed to know. They would arrive at key locations hours before we expected them, as if they could see the pattern of the war before it happened. It was impossible to tell whether this was instinct or design. And then came the mission on Darren's Reach. Officially, it was a simple raid on a fuel depot in contested space. The humans were ordered to hold the perimeter while our main forces secured the supplies. But when our ships jumped into the system, the battle was already over. The enemy fleet was scattered, the depot was intact, and the human ships were positioned in perfect formation, not for defense but for something far more ambitious. It was as if they had been waiting for us to arrive, and for something else to begin. No one spoke of it openly, but I saw the look in the eyes of our generals. This was no accident. They hadn't just taken the depot, they had turned the entire sector into a foothold that could control 3 major trade lanes. And they had done it without our approval. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept going over the reports, the positioning of their fleets, the way they had moved without hesitation. There was no sign of doubt in their actions, no indication they thought they might fail. It was as if they weren't playing the same game as us anymore. And I began to wonder if they ever had. The pattern only grew clearer after that. Human forces began to anticipate enemy assaults in sectors we had left undefended. They would arrive just in time to turn the tide, and each victory gave them another piece of territory, another fragment of control. It was all within the bounds of the war, but if you looked at it from above you could see the shape forming. They were building something. It was subtle enough to deny, but undeniable once seen. Their fleets were positioned to support each other, to move instantly from one end of the front to the other. Their supply lines were shorter, more efficient. And their alliances, that was the most dangerous part. In quiet, unrecorded moments, human commanders were making friends in places our empire had long ignored. Colonies, fringe worlds, even former enemies, they spoke to them with that same steady confidence they used on the battlefield. And those worlds listened. It was a slow, creeping shift. The kind you don't notice until you wake up one day and realize the ground beneath you has moved. The tension inside the High Council reached a breaking point. Some wanted to strip the humans of command entirely. Others argued we couldn't win without them. Meetings turned to shouting matches. Threats were made. And through it all, the humans kept winning battles. Then came the orders for the Phallus Rift. It was supposed to be a coordinated strike. Our fleets and the humans working together to crush a major enemy stronghold. The kind of victory that would end the war in our favor. But in the hours before the assault, human ships began moving. Not toward the rift, but away from it. I demanded answers. None came. The official reports were vague, citing unforeseen tactical developments. But our intelligence logs showed something different. Encrypted human transmissions bouncing through relay points we didn't control. They weren't abandoning the fight. They were heading somewhere else. Somewhere they considered more important than our orders. We launched without them. And for the first time in months we lost. Badly. The enemy's counterattack was swift and merciless. Our fleets barely escaped intact. And as we limped back to regroup, word reached us of what the humans had done. They had struck deep behind enemy lines, targeting not a military base, but a massive civilian convoy, the logistical heart of the enemy war machine. The convoy was destroyed completely. The enemy's supply chain collapsed overnight. Strategically it was a masterstroke. But it was not the war we had planned to fight. And now the humans had proven something dangerous, not just to us but to the galaxy. They could win without us. From that moment on, the air in every meeting felt charged, heavy with the unspoken truth. The humans were no longer just soldiers in our war. They were a power in their own right. And powers that strong, do not stay subordinate forever. I can feel it now in the silence between battles. A shift in the way they look at us. Less like commanders, and more like obstacles. Their victories are becoming sharper, more decisive, and the spaces they control grow with each passing day. I don't know what they're building. I don't know who they'll strike when the time comes. But I know this, something is coming. I can see it in the way their fleets move now, in the way their commanders speak in quiet, private tones. The war we think we are fighting is ending. And the war they are fighting is about to begin. Something shifted in the days after the rift. At first it was subtle. An unease in the command halls, a pause in conversations when a human officer entered the room. Our leaders spoke in tighter circles, always behind closed doors, as if words could no longer be trusted in open air. But the war didn't stop and neither did the humans. They fought with the same relentless drive, but now, there was an edge to it. Victories weren't just decisive, they were surgical. Targets were chosen with precision, each strike dismantling parts of the enemy's infrastructure we hadn't even considered. It would have been admirable if it didn't feel like a pattern only they could see. Then came the reports. At first, they were dismissed as enemy propaganda, claims that humans had been sighted in regions far beyond our front lines. Worlds untouched by our war, neutral sectors, were suddenly talking about mysterious fleets that arrived, spoke to their leaders and left without firing a shot. The descriptions matched human ships exactly. We searched our deployment logs. Every vessel was accounted for. Every crew was where they were supposed to be. But I knew enough by then to stop trusting what the logs told me. The truth came to me one night in a low-band encrypted message from a captain I trusted with my life. He'd been stationed in the far reaches of the Meridian sector. No active combat there, no strategic interest. And yet he'd seen them. A group of human ships, traveling without transponders, meeting with leaders of a neutral colony, and leaving with cargo bays full. When I pressed him for what the cargo was, he hesitated before answering. Weapons. Not ours. Not standard issue. Something new. The humans were arming someone. And not just anyone. Word began to trickle in from our outer scouts. Isolated colonies with no history of military resistance were suddenly better defended, with shield arrays and kinetic platforms they couldn't possibly have built on their own. Their leaders refused to say where they'd come from. But their fleets bore the same battle markings I'd seen on human ships. It was then I understood, we were no longer the only ones benefiting from humanity's war. I brought my findings to the High Council. They dismissed me at first, but I could see in their faces they already suspected. The war on our official maps was a shadow of the real one. Somewhere out there, the humans were shaping a battlefield that had nothing to do with the enemy we thought we were fighting. And then came the second twist, one we never saw coming. An enemy fleet larger than any we'd faced appeared on the edge of our core systems. Their approach was silent, unchallenged. Our long-range sensors picked them up too late, as if they had slipped past every net we'd cast. Panic swept through the command chambers. Fleets were scrambled, defenses readied. But before we could engage, the enemy ships stopped. And in the silence that followed, a transmission cut through every channel. It wasn't the enemy's voice. It was human. A single message broadcast to every ship, every station, every listening post in range. Stand down. This is not your fight. I will never forget the sound of it, the calm, the certainty, the way it wasn't a request but an instruction. And worse, our forces obeyed. Ships that should have fired on sight held their positions. Captains looked to their crews and crews looked back with unspoken understanding. The enemy fleet didn't move. They didn't fire. And after several long minutes they turned and left. No one could explain it. No one dared ask the humans what had happened. But I knew. I knew because I'd seen the pattern too many times before. This wasn't an accident. This was coordination. The humans had spoken to our enemy before this battle ever began. And whatever was agreed upon, it was not in our hands. From that moment, the war no longer belonged to us. We were fighting scraps of battles, holding territory that didn't matter, while somewhere else, beyond the maps we knew, another war was being fought. A war only the humans understood. The High Council was divided. Half wanted to sever the alliance immediately, fearing what the humans would do next. The other half argued that cutting them off would leave us exposed, vulnerable. No one could agree. But while we argued, the humans kept moving. Their fleets disappeared for days, sometimes weeks, and when they returned they brought with them new ships. Sleeker, faster, armed with weapons we didn't recognize. Their crews were different too. Not all were human. Some were from worlds we had once considered enemies. Others were from colonies that had no part in our war at all. They were building an army. Not ours. Theirs. And yet, they still fought alongside us when the official battles came. They still bled for our cause. They still stood in the fire when the enemy pressed close. It was the duality that terrified me the most. Because I couldn't tell if we were still their allies, or already their pawns. The enemy must have felt it too, because their movements began to change. They avoided human-led fleets when possible, striking instead at our forces directly. It was as if they understood that destroying us meant nothing if the humans remained. And maybe they were right. I think about that often now, in the quiet moments before a battle. I wonder if, when the final strike comes, it will even be aimed at us at all. Or if we will simply be caught in the middle of something far larger, far older, and far more dangerous than the war we thought we were fighting. Because the humans are not slowing down. They are not growing tired. And every time I look into their eyes after another victory, I see it, that same fire I saw on the frozen moon, the fire that told me they were never ours to command. The only question left is, when will the rest of the galaxy see it too? And when they do, will it already be too late? It began without warning. The humans had been quiet for weeks, their fleets moving in predictable patterns for the first time in months. No unsanctioned raids. No mysterious disappearances. On the surface, it felt like they had finally settled back into the role we'd given them. That was the first sign something was about to happen. The second was the silence on the outer fronts. Our scouts reported enemy fleets pulling back, abandoning strongholds they'd held for years without a fight. It made no sense. No forced retreats like that without a reason. And yet, when we pressed forward, the sectors were empty, ships gone, bases stripped, systems abandoned. And then the message came. It wasn't sent to us directly. It was sent to everyone. Our empire. Our enemy. The neutral worlds. Even the colonies that swore they wanted nothing to do with our war. A single transmission, human in origin, voice calm but unshakable. This war ends today. The coordinates that followed were in the dead heart of the contested zone, an uninhabited system with nothing but a dim red star and a scatter of frozen rocks. Both sides scrambled fleets toward it. Our orders were to meet the humans there and secure whatever they had found. We thought it would be a trap. We were wrong. When we arrived, they were already waiting. Dozens of human ships, more than we had ever seen in one place. And they weren't alone. Flanking them were vessels of every kind, designs from our enemies' worlds, from neutral systems, from places I'd never even heard of. Some looked like warships, others like hastily armed freighters. All of them bore the same insignia now, a simple mark painted on their hulls, a circle broken by a single vertical line. The humans had not built a fleet. They had built a coalition. Our enemy arrived soon after, but instead of opening fire, they stopped. There was no tension in their movements, no sign they were preparing to attack. The humans hailed both sides at once. They didn't shout. They didn't threaten. They spoke with the same quiet authority they had always carried. They told us that they had been fighting a different war all along, not for territory, not for resources, but for the survival of the galaxy itself. While we bled each other dry, something else had been growing in the dark, a force neither side had seen, a network of raiders, slavers, and mercenaries using the chaos to carve out their own empire in the uncharted reaches. It was they who had armed the enemy against us. They who had kept us fighting while they grew stronger. And the humans had found them. The retreats, the hidden fleets, the secret meetings, they had all been part of building this alliance. An army not bound to any single flag, but to a single cause, ending the greater threat before it reached us. At first I didn't believe them. Why not tell us? Why keep us in the dark? But when they opened a channel to show what they had seen, the truth left no room for doubt. The images were worse than war. Whole worlds stripped bare. Stations turned into cages. Ships full of prisoners drifting in the black. This wasn't conquest. It was erasure. And then the humans said something that chilled me to the core. We couldn't win with you divided. So we decided to make you unite. The coalition fleet moved out before we could respond. Humans in the lead, their strange new allies at their side, charging toward coordinates none of us had seen before. And we followed. Our enemy followed too. For the first time in living memory, we were all pointed in the same direction. The battle that followed at the edge of the uncharted sectors was unlike anything I had ever seen. The enemy we thought we had known was nothing compared to this. Their ships were brutal, built for speed and slaughter, swarming in waves that seemed endless. Our combined forces barely held the line. I watched human ships take the brunt of the first strike, weaving through fire with impossible precision, cutting into the heart of the enemy's formation. They didn't fight like soldiers anymore. They fought like a force of nature, fast, relentless, unyielding. For hours the sky burned. Entire fleets vanished in the fire. We lost more ships in that one battle than in years of our war. But slowly the tide began to turn. The coalition's strange mix of tactics, human unpredictability, alien precision, sheer will, started to break the enemy's swarm. And then the humans did something no one expected. They pulled back. Not in retreat, no. They were moving toward a single massive vessel at the enemy's core, a dreadnought so vast it blotted out the star behind it. We didn't even know it existed until then. The humans didn't slow down. They tore through its escort like it was nothing. When they reached its hull, they didn't try to destroy it from the outside. They boarded it. We could only watch from the edges of the fight, holding the line as human signals vanished into the dreadnought's shadow. The battle raged around us, but my eyes stayed locked on that black shape, waiting for something, anything, to happen. Minutes passed. Then the dreadnought shuddered. A deep, rumbling light began to spread from its center, glowing through the fractures in its armor. And then, with a sound that felt like the tearing of the universe itself, it exploded. The shockwave ripped through the enemy fleet, scattering what was left. Without their core ship they broke. Some fled. Some surrendered. The battle was over. We had won. But the humans were gone. Their ships were still there, drifting quietly in formation, but when we hailed them there was no response. Not one. It was only hours later, as we began the cleanup, that the first transmissions came through, scrambled, weak but unmistakably human. They weren't on their ships anymore. They were somewhere else. They had found something inside the dreadnought. Something they couldn't explain over an open channel. Something that needed them, and only them. Before they cut the transmission, I heard one final sentence. "We ended your war. Now we have to fight ours." And just like that, they were gone. The coalition dissolved without them. Our enemy turned back to their worlds, our fleets limped home. On paper, the war was over. But in the quiet of my own mind, I knew the truth. The humans had not just saved us. They had left to face something worse. And somewhere out beyond the edge of every map we've ever drawn, they are still fighting. When they return, if they return, the galaxy will not be the same. I don't know whether to be grateful or afraid, because we sought the perfect warriors. And what we got is something we may never be able to control again. The battlefield was quiet now, though the silence felt heavier than the war itself. The smoke drifted low, clinging to the scorched earth as if reluctant to let go. All around, the remnants of machines lay broken, their metal frames twisted and useless. The war was over. At least that's what everyone said. But I could feel something deeper lingering in the air, a weight that wasn't from the ash or the dust. Humans were scattered across the wreckage, some sitting in exhausted silence, others helping the wounded. Their armor was scratched and burned, their faces lined with fatigue, but their eyes still burned with the same fire that had carried them through every impossible moment. It was strange how the ones who were meant to be the perfect warriors were also the ones who carried the deepest compassion. I had seen them risk their lives not only for their own but for the enemy too. No one had expected that. No one had believed that mercy could be a weapon. I walked slowly, stepping over debris, passing bodies covered with sheets. We had fought together for so long, yet I still didn't understand them completely. They could be brutal in battle, ruthless when the situation demanded it, yet the moment the fighting ended, they would offer water, food, even comfort to those who had tried to kill them. That was their strength, something we could never build in a lab or design in a soldier. Far ahead, I saw the small group gathered near the command post. The human commander, his voice still hoarse from shouting orders, was speaking softly now. Around him stood survivors from different worlds, even some from the enemy's ranks. I could see the disbelief on their faces, the same disbelief I had once carried. How could these beings, so fragile in body compared to us, hold such unshakable will? The war's final day had been chaos. We had been pushed to the brink, our defenses collapsing. It should have ended in defeat, but the humans had done something no one could have predicted. They didn't just fight harder, they fought smarter, bending every rule, every assumption about what was possible. They moved like they were driven by something far greater than survival. I think that was the moment I realized the truth. They weren't just fighting for themselves or even for victory. They were fighting for each other. Now, in the quiet aftermath, I felt the weight of that realization pressing on me. We had sought the perfect warriors, cold, precise, unflinching. What we got instead were fighters who bled, who feared, who sometimes doubted themselves, but who kept moving forward anyway. And somehow that made them unstoppable. I stopped beside a young soldier who was staring out at the horizon. His hands were trembling, his knuckles scraped raw. When I asked if he was all right, he didn't answer at first. Then he whispered, "I'm just glad it's over." His voice cracked on the last word, and I realized there was no victory in his tone, only relief. That too was something I had never seen in the perfect soldiers we'd engineered in the past. Those creations never cared if it ended. Humans cared. The enemy had surrendered in the final hours, though not because they were out of weapons. They had seen something in humanity they couldn't fight against. Not fearlessness, but an ability to keep standing even when broken. That was more terrifying than any weapon we could make. The wind shifted, carrying the distant sounds of repair crews and the faint hum of medical drones. Somewhere behind me, someone laughed quietly, a small sound in all the ruin. Life was already returning. I thought back to the first time I'd met them, how I had judged them by their flaws. Too emotional. Too reckless. Too stubborn. And yet, it was exactly those flaws that had ended the war. The perfect warriors we had wanted would have obeyed orders without question, but humans, they questioned everything. They adapted. They refused to let anyone else write the ending for them. One of the medics passed by, carrying supplies, her uniform streaked with dirt and blood. She paused long enough to hand me a small canteen of water, nodding before moving on. That simple act, in the middle of all this destruction, said more than any victory speech could. As the sun began to set, the sky turned deep orange and gold, its light spilling over the ruins. For the first time in what felt like years, the horizon looked peaceful. But I knew this peace hadn't come cheap. Every quiet moment now was paid for by those who never made it to see it. I joined the others near the command post, where they were already planning the rebuilding. The humans didn't talk much about celebration. Their focus was on what came next. There were wounded to care for, cities to restore, lives to rebuild. War might have been their proving ground, but peace was where they truly shone. Before we parted ways, I asked the commander what he thought had made the difference in the end. He smiled faintly, tired lines deepening around his eyes. "We fight for each other," he said simply. "That's it. That's all there is." As I walked away, I carried those words with me. We had searched the galaxy for warriors who could win our battles, imagining they would be strong because of their lack of weakness. But humanity had turned that idea inside out. Their strength came from their weakness, from their ability to feel every loss, every joy, and still keep going. I would tell this story for the rest of my life. Not as a tale of weapons or strategy, but as a reminder of what we learned when we found them. We had sought the perfect warriors. We got humanity instead. And in the end, that was far more than we had ever hoped for. The fires in the distance burned low now, just faint glimmers against the darkening sky. Soon they too would fade, leaving only the memory of what had been. But the humans would remember. They always remembered, not to dwell on the pain, but to carry forward the lessons it carved into them. That was their way. And maybe now it would be ours too.